Welcome to Photocycle. I'm Marc Silber. We're very fortunate to be in Yosemite Valley with Michael Adams, Ansel's son, who led us on a journey following Ansel to one of his favorite spots, Glacier Point. Ansel Adams was not only an icon of photography, he was also a generous teacher who taught us so much of what we now know as modern photography. Our purpose in this photocycle is to bring you as close as possible to a master of photography. You'll learn key points that you can use to improve your own work from the premier photography teacher himself. In our interview, Michael talks about the key points of photography that Ansel used to capture his timeless images. There's nothing like seeing for yourself and hearing about these powerful points of photography. Please sit back as we bring you this rare glimpse inside Ansel Adams' world of photography. I'm Marc Silber. We're back in Yosemite with Michael Adams. Michael, tell us where we are.
We are at Glacier Point, 7,200 feet on the edge of Yosemite Valley with a spectacular day, a little hazy, a little smoke in the air from control burns outside the park, but the waterfalls are running full. We're seeing the new growth of the trees in the valley, not so much up here, but just a spectacular scene today with the snow in the backcountry, and we're here by ourselves with the only noise, really, the waterfalls in the background.
Pretty amazing.
It is.
Pretty amazing. Okay, so your dad took a lot of shots from up here.
He did.
What are some of the shots that come to mind?
Well, of course, the waterfalls. There's several of the waterfalls, and this time of year is just perfect for that. The falls are full. Looking across at North Dome and then Mount Hoffman behind, I know there's a number of his pictures with wonderful thunderstorms, thunderclouds behind him. Looking up Tenaya Canyon, Clouds Rest, Half Dome, and then the backcountry here, Mount Florence in the distance, Lyle, and then closer the Clark Range, Mount Clark and Gray Peak that we can see here, Red Peak behind the trees. Nevada Fall and Vernal Fall. This is just a place where you can see all kinds of things.
And of course the centerpiece right behind us,
Half Dome. And, it's
and what about that story in 1927?
In 1927, in April, about this same time, my dad and my mother and some friends climbed what's called the LeConte Gully between Grizzly Peak and this ridge line, climbed up on the shoulder of Half Dome to the diving board that you can see illuminated there with a very sharp knife edge. And he took a picture there with his glass plate camera that probably changed his life and his future. His next to last glass plate he took with a yellow filter, but realized that he wasn't going to get the result that he wanted. He changed to a red filter, took that picture, and when he developed it, he realized that he had made the right decision, that he knew what he was doing, and he knew what he was going to get in the final picture. And he always said that that was probably the time that he decided on a career change from being a musician, a pianist, to photography. At least that was the beginning of it, and the idea of pre-visualization and knowing what the final outcome could be.
And that's apropos to our theme as a photocycle show, which is from visualization all the way through to the final print, which is what obviously Ansel taught.
He did, and this was the beginning. And over the next several years, he slacked off on the music side of it and began to take photography more seriously and was doing more.
How much do you think his music discipline and background influences photography?
I think it had a tremendous amount, and there are several photographers that were musicians first or along with their photography. It taught discipline,
right,
and it taught practice, and they made sure that everything was in line, as a musician would. And Ansel used to say, when he was asked about this, that the negative is the score and the performance would be the print, the final result. And so he used that terminology.
And I think that his discipline in terms of making the shot do what he wanted rather than just accidental had a lot to do with it.
Oh, absolutely. When he understood the science behind the photography he knew exactly what he wanted to get, and he knew how to get it. He knew the right combination of filters and exposures, and he ultimately went on and developed his own system, which gave him options from the instance of taking the picture to knowing what the result was going to be and how it should be printed. And this was a major step forward.
Yeah. I know one piece of advice that he gave for any photographer who really wanted to master their craft is they had to really learn the skills of photography and know their equipment.
I think that's true of any profession, though. If you really go at it haphazard, you're not going to be as good at it. But if you really understand the science behind it and the optics to a certain extent, and the lighting ability and the capabilities, and again, that's going to help tremendously.
Definitely. What was it like being around him when he was up here shooting these amazing scenes?
It was sometimes hectic because a lot of times things happened with the light or the clouds, and he wanted to get something done before the clouds change or the light change. So sometimes it was quite hectic and hurrying up, and so things like that. It was usually fun. It wasn't a drudgery at all.
Yeah.
It was enjoying being here in an environment and seeing what Ansel was seeing in the camera, and just watching him do it.
You know, one of the quotes that I use a lot that he said was, "You don't take a photograph, you make it."
True.
And I think that's what we recognize in his mastery. He visualized something and made the photograph.
And made
speak.
it, and a lot of people don't realize how much of what his final result was dependent upon what he did in the darkroom.
Right.
And that was, in many ways, the genius. A lot of us could take the picture and come up with a negative, but he could do some magic things within the darkroom, and he always told people that this is not reality. What I'm giving you in this print is not what you are seeing in this in the environment. You're seeing my interpretation of it, and you're seeing something that's very dramatic in many ways, but because of what he could do in the darkroom, that was usually the result.
And again, I think that's his musical background. You have the score, but how it's interpreted is your performance.
Is the performance. And he, you know, apropos to that, he always said that when he moved his negatives down to the University of Arizona and the Center for Creative Photography, he was saying, you know, somebody in the future, 50 years from now, could take one of my negatives and interpret it in a different way, and that would be just fine.
That's amazing. That's pretty generous.
Well, I don't know how often that's happened, but the possibility does exist.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Now, what are we looking at back here? The fall?
Well, right behind us, we're seeing Yosemite Falls, and we are having a pretty spectacular runoff. The last couple of nights have been cold, so there's probably less water today than there would have been 4 or 5 days ago. But given today's temperatures, I think in the next 24 to 48 hours, it'll be booming even more. Amazing. And you're seeing the valley, and the grass is really turning green. Everything is in bloom down there now.
You grew up here in Yosemite. This is home
did.
for you.
This is home. I was born here in 1933 in the valley. Went to local schools.
You were married here?
I was married here.
Your son was married here?
My son was married here. My parents were married here, and my grandparents were married here. So.
What's it like having Yosemite as your home?
Boy, it's a wonderful legacy, and we've been in the park as a business now for 106 years. My grandfather started as a landscape painter in 1902 in a tent.
Amazing.
And so we were here before there was a National Park Service. So the family has a long history here.
So when you come back, it's just like me going back to my hometown? You just have all those same feelings?
Oh yeah, I mean, I love the scenery. My friends have moved on. There's probably nobody here that was with me in those younger years, but coming back, the friends are the mountains and the valley and the waterfalls.
And how often did Ansel visit Yosemite, would you say?
He was here every year of his life after
Every
1916.
year.
That was his first year. He came back. Usually he was here at least twice a year, usually in June. He had workshops here for many, many years, and usually here at Christmas time for the Brace Bridge. And there were other occasions he'd have a reason to come to Yosemite, and at any time of the year.
Now, did he have a darkroom here so that when he took these shots, he just ran back to the darkroom?
Yes, there was a darkroom behind the gallery that did primarily photo finishing, because the early studio gallery here that started by my grandfather did photo finishing, and so they had all the equipment, and Ansel put in some deep tanks and things that he could use. And for many years, I would say during the 30s and into the 40s, he used this darkroom a great deal. He had another darkroom in San Francisco in a house there, but since he was spending time here, this was perfect.
Yeah. Do you know anything about his workflow? Would he shoot and then immediately go into the darkroom generally, or?
Usually, I think he would develop at least. He would get your negatives. He might not do the printing, but
Right.
he would develop the negatives as soon as possible.
And then he knew.
And then he knew what he had. And
Right.
then they would be, you know, dried and stored, and he would get to them later as far as the printing goes.
So for our digital photographers to appreciate that, I mean, this is the amount of effort it took to get a great photograph in those days.
It was a lot more work then than it is by just clicking your digital camera, which is a wonderful thing to do now.
It is, but he certainly indicated that no matter what kind of camera you had, you still had to practice that careful looking and visualization.
You did, and you know, you realize he used view cameras most of the time on a tripod,
Right.
8x10, 5x7, 4x5, and in the backcountry at 3 1/4, 4 1/4. So he composed all of his images for the most part on the ground glass of the camera.
With a hood.
With a focusing cloth over his head. He did use a smaller format, a 35 millimeter, and in later years the Hasselblad,
Right.
2 1/4, 2 1/4.
He was kind of a tech guy, wasn't he?
He was very much a tech guy. He loved the technology behind these. He was a very early user of Polaroid and worked with Polaroid as a consultant his whole life once Polaroid started.
Did he use Polaroids as a medium itself, or mainly as a practice shot?
No, he did. They developed a PN film, print negative film,
Oh, okay.
and you could expose these the film for the print or for the negative, depending on how you wanted to use it. Because he got both. He got a negative and a print from that taking the picture, and these were usually in a film pack on a back on his camera, and. Most of the time he did the ones that he did for his sort of his professional work, his fine art work, he would probably be exposing for the negative, but he would see what he had because he had a print also.
Yeah.
But then he could take that negative into the darkroom and make enlargements or a fine print from it.
That's great.
Then he did a lot of testing of new films for the Polaroid Corporation over the years.
Put yourself in his position. What advice do you think he would give, say, a new amateur photographer who's really trying to go to the next level? What do you think he would tell them?
Today, I think he would be fascinated with what digital has to offer. And I think whether he would go into the darkroom, the Adobe Photoshop,
Right.
or something like I don't know. But I think he would be so fascinated with the digital that he would encourage people to use it. And the problem is some of the cut film, the companies aren't making it anymore. They're cutting that part of it out. It's making it more difficult for people to use the traditional film for black and white.
You think he would have embraced digital photography?
I think he would have. I think he would have loved it.
Yeah, I agree.
I don't know. It's guessing, but he liked that kind of thing. And this is something new and something to play with
Yeah.
and to learn about.
So if we take the, sort of the top 5 things that he mentions over and over in his books, visualization has to be top of the list.
Speak of the external event, which is, we'll call it scenery. It's everything that happens outside in time and space, and people go snap, 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 and recording things for their own memory in the future. And contrasting with that, in the creative work, is the internal event, the thing that happens inside your mind when you see the photograph. And as Stieglitz had said, that when someone asked him about creative photography, what is creative photograph? He said, I merely go out into the world. I want to make a photograph. I come across something that excites me. I see the picture in my mind's eye, and I make the photograph. And then I give it to you as the equivalent of what I saw and felt. The whole key lies very specifically in seeing it in the mind's eye, which we call visualization.
Can you give us an idea of like he were up here, what he would do in terms of visualizing? Did he use the framing card himself?
He used the framing card. He used it more in his workshops. I think he probably set up his camera and used the ground glass
Okay.
as a framing card. which is very different than most photographers who probably use a 35 millimeter or a smaller format. But the ground glass was the framing card, I'm sure.
Yeah. And then what was his next step in his process after? So
Well, he knew the proper exposure. He used a photometer all the time. He used, he had an SEI meter he loved, which was a spot meter. He used that.
Half a degree.
It was very important to him.
Yeah.
Of course, and then setting the exposure, and then waiting for the right time. Now, if there were clouds, he would probably wait a little bit and try to get a good cloud picture with it.
Right.
If there weren't, there wasn't much holding back taking the picture right away.
And I've heard stories where he would take a reading and know that it was off and use his own.
Well, that's a possibility. He was pretty, knowledgeable about that.
He knew what the value of different light sources were.
So, and one of the things that's very evident up in the high country, it's very different here than it is down, say, in the flatlands and the seashore, and there's so much light, and especially, I'm sure, in a day like today with all the snow and the reflections.
Yeah.
But he realized that, I think, and I probably would adjust for that.
You think he had a lot of fun when he was shooting?
I think so. He enjoyed it. He really enjoyed taking pictures. And he also enjoyed the darkroom aspect of it and producing these things.
Yeah.
It was a source of pleasure.
Well, listen, it's certainly been great talking to you,
Well,
Michael. I can't thank you enough for bringing us up here.
It's been a pleasure, and you've come at a perfect time, and you're seeing Yosemite at its best.
Thank you, Michael.
You're most welcome.
Okay.